Thanks for coming back. Today we're going to look at making the pommel nut for the K-bar. It's my first time using the new mini mill and lathe that I picked up. I'm going to start off with some 3/8 inch bar and we're going to put that into the mill. The caveat I'm going to do here is I don't know what I'm doing. This is my first time really using the lathe portion. Normally I manually make these and it takes a long time. Not that this one didn't, but it's nice using the newer tools. So I'm going to start off with this lathe cutting tool to face the end of the bar. It's rough and I just want to make sure I'm starting from a known surface. So we'll get it clamped up. I had to use a couple shims to get it so that it was actually centered on the bar. I start off by just touching just to find out where the edge is. You'll notice the first pass didn't really take off any chips at all, but I've just made sure I've started from a known point. At this point, I'm going to now turn it in a couple thou and go across the face again, just making sure I've got a nice smooth surface. I touch it up with a little bit of 320 grit sandpaper just to take that little tiny nub that's in the center. Next step is to use these centering bits. They're short and stubby and sturdy. That'll ensure that I get a nice clean hole that doesn't wander like a drill bit typically does. And now I'm just going to drive the drill bit into the spinning workpiece. It's different on a lathe. The bit is stationary. The workpiece is actually spinning. I'll try and come around to this side. Sorry for the shakiness. Just to show you that it's a stationary bit and a spinning workpiece. But the nice thing is it is dead center on that rod. Next step is to drill a hole that we're going to tap later. We're going to put in 1032 threads so that it'll actually bite onto the tang that I've got set up on the K-bar. So here we're replacing the centering drill bit with an actual drill bit. It'll go into the hole made by the centering drill bit and continue on down that, giving the drill bit some stability. I use the calipers to actually measure the width of the pommel because we're countersinking this. And then I'm going to actually use the dial to push the drill bit in the depth I need it to. So you can see the dial right here. And as I'm turning it, I'm just measuring how far in I have to go. I'm not real accurate like a machinist, but it's close enough for a pommel on a knife. Now that we've got the hole drilled, we're going to use a bottoming tap. What this will mean is it's going to actually put threads right to the bottom of the hole or as close to it as we can. Clear everything out of the way and then manually tap the hole. I add a little bit of cutting oil into the center of the hole and the tap goes in like butter. You can actually see the little shavings coming out. I test the hole with a scrap piece of 1032 all thread just to see how far in we go, make sure we've got enough depth, and I just put a little black mark. No big science here. Once I've got it all tested, the next step is to actually create the shoulder or the countersink that's going to go into the pommel. To do that, I'm actually going to go back to the lathe, use one of the cutting tools, and start milling away material from the bar. I use a feeler gauge so that I can always stop at exactly the same point. So here I start my first pass again. I'm calling this my touching pass. I'm really not looking to take off material. I'm just coming up just so that it touches and going the length of my cut. You can start seeing it just peel back a little bit of the edge. There's no real chips or anything else coming off. And then on each pass afterwards, I take a couple thou off, going back and forth, bumping up against the feeler gauge. And you can see as it travels, I'm now going to bump up against the feeler and you'll see the dial start to move. I want to back off my cut as soon as I see that dial bump up against that top mark there. So as soon as I see that needle bump up against my 0 mark, I back off the lathe. And we continue to do this back and forth until we start getting close to our desired thickness. As I come up on my measurements, I do a test fit and it's not quite there, so I'm going to do one more pass and I'm going to come up with just the perfect fit. The first step is complete. We've now got the countersink all threaded and centered. Next step is to cut off a piece. We're going to use this parting blade so that we get a nice straight even cut across. And I'm going to just slowly start moving it in a couple thou at a time until it actually separates. But then I run into a little bit of a disaster. So as I'm cranking it in, this shows some of my experience. Anybody with any help or comments, please add them to the feed. But I probably took too big of a bite and we had a little bit of a disaster. Yep, I did it. I probably pressed too hard and I broke the cutting blade and it's the only one I got. So we're gonna go old school, back to the bandsaw, and we're just gonna finish this cut. There's not much left in the middle there, so it's not much. Now we're gonna add 2 holes so that we can actually tighten the pommel nut. I'm gonna go back to the mill just simply because this way I can drag it straight across and make sure that I get my holes lined up. So I'm using that centering drill bit again. It's nice and short and sturdy, and I only need to put in 2 very small holes, 1/16 inch. I get it centered up and then drill the first hole. The nice thing is with the calibrated knobs, I can actually measure how far in I want to go each time, making sure I get a nice even spacing. I drill the first hole. I don't go all the way through. I'm just looking for enough to put a tool in so that I can tighten the pommel nut. Then I move over to the other side, do the same measurement in, and drill the second hole. Now we're going to put the pommel nut back into the lathe so we can actually dome over and round and sand the end of the pommel nut. I did try and figure out how to do a dome on a lathe, and there's some real complex calculations, but honestly this worked really good. I just took a file, rounded off the corners, got it to the shape I wanted, like if I was using a wood lathe. I then took some sandpaper, sanded it nice and smooth, and we end up with our finished pommel nut. For sanding it, I used a combination of tools. I have this handy little pipe sander, and it comes with a whole bunch of different grits, but the nice thing is it's got sort of a slack belt portion you can see I'm using here that helps me get a nice smooth round dome on the pommel nut itself. It comes with a bunch of grits. I think right now I'm using about a 400 grit to try and smooth it off. I'm going to come back afterwards and sand it with some actual wet dry sandpaper to get a nice finish on it. And once we're all done, we take it out, and what we end up with is a nice little pommel nut that threads into the end of the K-bar. If you like these, please like and subscribe, and let me know of anything else you'd like me to put up.